So hello to everyone that's joined us on this very, very special call today. My name's Junior Saunders, and I'm going to speak to you from the heart. I'm going to tell you very quickly about my own experiences of being in care, because I think it's something that would resonate with you. It's something that you'll feel is authentic and it's real. But I actually want to share with you some really relevant points within my own life that I think you may be able to relate to. So I was put into care from 6 weeks old. My mother couldn't look after me at the time. I still don't know to this reason, this time, sorry, why she didn't want to look after me, or why she didn't look after me. But I do know that my paternal grandmother was very against the fact that I was mixed race and my siblings were mixed race. So I think that does play a part within that. When I was 6 weeks old, I developed whooping cough. I was put into ICU, which is intensive care unit, and I died for about 40 seconds. And I always laugh at this point because I think at that particular point, I would have been a memory. But actually, I came back to life. And I always say to myself, and in my darkest days of being in care, this is the one thing that always keeps me going. I was sent back for a reason. And it's only now at 36 years old that I'm starting to discover that reason. And part of that reason is to absolutely empower every single person that's in care, who has been through care and has their own story to tell, telling them about my own experiences of foster care. And that leads me on very, very nicely to who we're speaking about today. And you can see naturally the smile is on my face because I am absolutely privileged to really, really start this conversation, because it's going to be one that you're going to find very, very useful. So we're really lucky today to be joined by a young adult fiction author. Now, Alex Wheatle is a award-winning writer, and he's received an MBE for services in literature, among many other awards. Now, you may recognize his name from a recent BBC series called Small Axe. Now, this is based on real life experiences of London's West Indian communities between the 1960s and also the 1980s. There's a whole episode reflecting Alex's story, which I would highly recommend that you watch. It's been written extensive, there's an extensive collection, of novels, including Croydon Nights, Brixton Rock, and also Homegirl. Now, much of Alex's novels are based upon growing up within the care system. Now, care experiences himself, Alex has really grew up around the Shirley Oaks children's home within Croydon, and actually uses his own experiences within the Small Axe series and within his writing. That introduction is only a tip of the iceberg as to the amazing work that Alex is continuing to do. Alex, we're so privileged to have you on today. Thank you very much for your time. It's much appreciated.
I'm happy to be here, Junior. And wow, what an intro!
Let's listen to your journey. I want to find out who Alex really is,
Right.
the author, the proclaimed work that you've done. But also, what I want to do is I want to speak to Alex, who was in care, Alex that went through all the experiences.
Yeah.
And care is a very, very real place. So
Yeah.
let's begin with your journey. What was care like for you, Alex?
I struggled to express myself. And so I kind of took to magazines. I was a very, very quiet child, very quiet. And um, you mentioned earlier, Junior, that sometimes when you're like that, you don't know how to process trauma or pain. And so when something did affect me, I would lash out.
Yeah.
And so I could not quite understand or process what was happening to me. And so the older I got, the more rebellious I became. And I would fight back to the people who had physically abused me. And this led to fights in a children's home, fights at schools. And by the time I was 14, I wasn't attending school whatsoever. First adult I truly trusted was Simeon in prison. He was a dread, he had long locks. And the thing that marked him out different is that for some reason he saw good in me. And I always saw myself as a nobody. I remember writing a poem about this is a letter to Mr. Nobody, and I was writing to myself because that is how low I felt to myself, that I couldn't contribute anything. I was no good. I was not smart. I couldn't do anything. But you know what? I could do something. I was a very good reader, even from a very early age. I could pick up magazines at 5 years old and read them. At 6 years old, I was reading newspapers. I didn't even recognize that as a skill. or as anything that I could do something with.
It was
Because
something that felt, I bet it was something that
yeah,
just felt nice, right?
yeah, it just felt
Yeah,
nice.
felt good. Yeah.
It just
Sorry to
felt
interrupt.
good,
Carry
and
on.
yeah. And so Simeon managed to make me believe that I could contribute something, that I'm not worthless, that I am valuable. And he made me believe that my life is important. I think that was the most important thing. That Alex, despite your bad start, whatever, never forget that your life is important as anybody else's. And this is what I say to schools up and down the country where I visit. My university students, I say to them, look, yes, I know you had a bad start, but never underestimate yourself, and always think yourself as valuable as much as anybody else. And your aspirations, your dreams are just as important as anybody else's. And when Simeon told me that, my mind started to switch. I started to believe in myself. I started to say, okay, I've got these skill sets. I'm a good reader. I can write a little bit. I can write a bit of poetry. I can write a rap or whatever. Let me nurse that. Let me hone that. Let me express that. Let me start expressing what's in my head, what's in my heart. Because before it just came out with violence because I didn't know how to process how
I
I was
can relate
feeling.
to that. Like the first time that I got in trouble with my first criminal conviction was battery, and it was when I was 11 years old. And violence was a way that I can be seen because of the hurt, because of the void that was always
Mm,
felt within myself. If I lash out, that means the attention's on me. And it's only now as a 35-year-old, like older guy, I can realize at that time it was because I felt very out of place. I felt very, very unfamiliar with my surroundings because it was always a fight. Have you found that sometimes it's exhausting because you're constantly trying to be seen, and
yeah,
sometimes you're being really it's almost like miscommunication. You're trying to say one thing but your actions are showing a different thing,
yeah.
and then somebody's picking up on something completely different. So I just wanted to add, I completely relate to that. That anger is something that I used to communicate with as well. For me, being somebody who's been brought up in care, my kind of savior was how good I'm able to communicate and wanting to be on television, because at the time I wanted to be on television, I wanted to be accepted, and I realized that, and I had to really make peace with that. Whereas now I still do, but the meaning's very, very different. And I know you touched upon being a really good natural reader. Do you think that that's what's inspired you to become a writer now?
Absolutely, because I could read well. That meant that when I first entered prison, and Simeon had all his selection of books, I could devour them at a relatively quick speed because of my reading ability. And so I was learning about all over the world. Basically, I was reading the Russian writers, I was reading the American writers, uh, all kinds of writers, and so that just informed me. That was like a massive knowledge bomb, if you like, in my head. So I was learning about people all over the world.
Yeah.
And then when I emerged from prison, I said to myself, well, where's my story? Where's the story of people like me? And so this is when I started to write lyrics about me, about how I was feeling. And so this is where one of my first poems was called Dear Nobody. And basically, it was about me writing a letter to my young self, and saying to my young self that I know you're alone. I know you don't. I know you think that no one will come for you, but they will. They will. There's love for you out there.
In terms of your own writing, is there any particular character that you've created in your writing that represents yourself and your past? And which character do you relate
Yeah,
to the most, do you think?
that's got to be Brenton Brown, who appears in my first book, Bricks and Rock. He carries my bitterness, he carries my rage, but he also has that mixed race element where he's not quite sure who he is or who he belongs to.
Yeah, Brett, I'm gonna have to check him out, man. He sounds like me, to be fair. And that leads me on to something that I think's, really relevant to anybody that's actually going to participate within the call, and actually to us as people that have been through care. Because I always say, just because you've left care, it doesn't leave you. You just
Mm.
have to process it, and you have to use it to your advantage, which I think is really, really important. And what difficulties do you think children in care may have in terms of their learning about their cultural roots, and do you have any advice for them that face that issue?
For me, I went to Brixton at 15, 16, and I loved it. I loved that there's an aspect of my cultural identity that I could learn. I don't like a crash course kind of thing. But no matter where your roots are, I think it's always good for you to learn about where your grandparents came from, what they did, what their culture was, what they enjoyed, how they lived their lives. I think that's very important to have a sense of yourself. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't just necessarily go for mixed race people or black people in London, but whoever you are. You might have a granddad who lives in Scotland. I think if you did so, then I think it's be a very interesting project for you to learn about that life, find out about his journey, find out about what he did, what he loved, what he was against, what his family were like. I think it all kind of grounds us and gives us an identity, a unique identity that is just us.
And what advice would you give to young people who are interested in a particular career, but they don't know how to achieve their goals because they've got this history of being in care and feeling like actually this is the expectation of what I'm about? How do we, or how would you take them from that place to really elevate them?
I would suggest to any young person who's care experience to try things. Just try things, whether it could be acting, whether it could be making pots, whether it could be any kind of activity. Just try different things to learn and discover where your skills are. Once you discover where your skills are, and then that is a place where you could just be you, where you could just develop and express your own self. And for me, that is like expressing the spirit of yourself, where you, whether it could be football, netball, snooker, whatever it may be. It might even be science. It might be mathematics. It's just something where you can express your own identity, your own kind of mind, your own loves, if you like. And I think that's very important for anybody, let alone people who are care experienced, just to find something that you've got a little corner in your week or your day where you could go to that place where you might be writing, where you might be doing something else, who knows what it could be, and where you could just enjoy that time and space to be you.
If there is something that you can say to every single person watching this that's in care, away from the titles, but as the person that was in care, what message would you give to every single person right now that might be at the end of their tether, that might be really confused, that might be feeling like I've had enough? What would be the one message that you would say from somebody from your core, being in care and living that and having to process the fact that that was your life? What would be the one thing that you would say before we go that really comes from the heart?
Comes from the heart. I guess I have to think very carefully about this, but in these kind of cases, I always go back to what Simeon told me when basically I had a breakdown in prison, and he kind of hugged me in, and he said to me, Alex, you're important. You're important. Don't let this get you. You're important. And so I would say to anybody listening to this, your life is important. I don't care what people have said about you or might have said about you, but your life is important. Believe that if you don't believe anything else. Your life is important.